since we are basically already there, let's talk about it. Like, all of this, what we're basically talking about in the context of incels, you've already said it. The more black pill someone is, doesn't mean at all that it's going to be more prone to violence. What about the terrorism designation for incels?
Well, it's only Canada, according to my knowledge. I may be outdated, and somebody just issued something that I haven't caught up with. But it's only Canada that issued that designation. Am I wrong about that? Correct me if
I
I'm wrong.
also only heard about Canada, to be honest.
Yeah. So I again, there are people who know more about incels as such. I'm not a political scientist. I'm a psychologist, right? So I'm interested in humans and what makes them move, and what makes them do things. Um, However, when I became interested in this phenomenon, it was because my colleagues were talking about it as the new emerging threat, like QAnon. Like the sky is falling. This is what's going to get us. And you have to admit the rhetoric is quite disturbing on incel forums. And of course, the manifestos that were produced by the notorious incels who mass murdered a bunch of people. So I became genuinely interested in this new phenomenon of an online community that exists around a set of beliefs. So this is kind of a new thing in radicalization, right? We didn't used to have this. Terrorism used to be, and radicalization used to be um, a phenomenon of small face-to-face groups, like the 9/11 bombers. But every other group until then, it's these people, they get together, they go underground together, they become really mutually dependent on each other, and they develop jointly this radical agenda, and then they act on it. And nowadays, with the proliferation of internet and social media, um, it allowed for something completely new to evolve. One of which was QAnon, and the other of which was incels, which is people from different continents, or who've never met each other, may not even know each other's real names. They find each other based on some shared fears or beliefs or ideas, and they interact almost entirely online. I'm talking about, you know, QAnon incels are even more exclusively online based groups. And in the case of incels, the beliefs are that the feminist movement and kind of the modern society has left a lot of men behind and unable to find a female companion for romantic relationships. And they feel that there is an unfair preference for good-looking men, that women have, and that the society as a whole has. So it gives advantage to men who have certain facial features, certain body features, and that it disadvantages men who don't, which they themselves believe to be these disadvantaged men. And by the way, this is what in my field we call this a grievance, right? So the belief that somebody wronged us or me, group grievance or individual grievance, or both. And the black pill idea, this whole pill vocabulary comes from, of course, the Matrix, which is another thing that QAnon and incels share, is the reference to the Matrix scene where Neo, the main character, is invited by this charismatic, leader Morpheus to choose either to take a red pill that's gonna expose the truth of the world to him, whatever the consequences, or take the blue pill and go back to the illusion that he was living in. So, um, being red pilled means to have had your eyes open to the reality of the world, which for incels, that reality is that the society is prejudiced against this kind of men that they are, and that women are unfair to them, and that they have been left behind. And then there is a spin on it that suggests that the only way to remedy this situation, to avenge this grievance, is to violently take over the current social order through an incel uprising, and kind of distribute all the women fairly, so that every man, including incels, would have a girlfriend or a female companion.
I'm not sure. You maybe know better than me how much of. I mean, at the end of the day, terrorism is igniting fear to get your means, uh, to get what you want, basically, because you're not able to directly force somebody. You can only do it by creating fear and by creating pressure from the violence that you do. That somehow sounds like what these perpetrators were doing, right? I mean, they were trying to change. They were not able to get what they want, so they were instigating direct violence to make people stop living in their good world, right? To basically, I mean, they were angry. There is a big anger towards normies that basically this unjust society, this society that makes them suffer so much, that they're supporting it by not helping them, by not making a change. And that's kind of also the idea behind Islamic terrorism, where you say, okay, we're going to bomb the Twin Towers because as American voters, you are able to change the politics of the US, and you are basically, it's your government, your tax money, you're basically upholding that society to a certain extent, right?
You are right about that. I'm not sure who you're talking about when you say perpetrators. Do you mean the actual
I
incels who committed
I try,
mass
yeah,
violence?
I try not to use their names because I think that's not good to do so.
Right, but I
So
think it's important to recognize that they were very few individuals, right? Out of a group that numbers, I mean, it's hard to count, but some people did, and it's something like tens of thousands around the world, right? And the question is, how many of those who call themselves incels and who participate in some of these discussions share the beliefs that propelled the mass violence of these individuals who are notorious for it? And in my research, it's most of individuals who identify as incels and support the ideology absolutely do not admire these individuals and don't think that their idea of what to do was the right idea.
yeah, I absolutely agree. I think that incels have nothing to do with these acts, like very
So
little to do.
there's a difference between designating the whole thing as a terrorist organization. Like Al Qaeda was a terrorist
Yeah.
organization that existed for the sole purpose of carrying out actions against the U.S. government, Western government, and its proxies that were violent and destructive. Right. The question is whether that designation applies just as well to incels as a group, and my contention is that it doesn't.
I agree.
So
I
you
agree. I
know
just
there are a number of Americans who have committed horrific actions. Does it mean that America is a what do you call it, state that sponsors terrorism? And my contention is that you cannot judge the entirety of the group based on a few individuals, especially if we have data that show that most people in the group do not support those individuals.
yes, I agree 100%. But there was this one quote from your paper. I wrote it down. That the justification for it not being terrorism was that it was instead labeled a hate crime, as far as I can remember. Um, and I don't really agree, because I feel like it is an act of terrorism. But it doesn't mean that incels are a terrorist organization, or that. But I still would label those acts terroristic acts. I don't know.
I
Would you
mean,
disagree?
this is now we're into the legal definitions, and I said up front that those are very strategic. Like, for example, in the US, you can't be charged with terrorism if you're a domestic actor. So if you go and blow up a synagogue because of your beliefs, anti-Semitic beliefs, or if you go and shoot up a mosque because of your anti-Islamic beliefs, you're going to be charged with hate crimes, not terrorism, because
Mm-hmm.
of how definitions in the US work. So I think I would rather not step into the, it's not my
Sure.
forte or
Mm-hmm.
my expertise.
Mm-hmm. Sure. What do you? One other thing that you talk about a lot is martyrdom, and I was a little bit. You explicitly state that both the acts committed by incels and also Islamic terrorism, so suicide bombers, are by definition not martyrs. And I have a big. I don't, because the reason why you say that is because, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's because harm is being done to others, and
Yeah, because it's an
that
act of violence. It's an
yeah,
act of violence. So a martyrdom is an act of self-sacrifice
yeah.
that is stripped of any violence, either initial violence that results in the martyrdom, or violence in response. Um, I mean, it's a semantic question, but it's also a psychological question. So semantically, you can define it however you want, and I can define it however I want. However, psychologically, there's a particular power that a true martyr has over observers, a power that cannot be matched by a hero. Which, I mean, if I were supporting, the cause of Islamic terrorists, I would grant them the nomenclature of heroes, but not martyrs.
Mm-hmm.
And psychologically, it's a matter of interpretation. So you are a witness to an act, whether you witness it first person or you witness it as a video on an internet, or you're witnessing it by reading, about it. Um, you are perceiving a situation and a person acting in that situation. And when a martyr, like, the model of martyrdom of the Western civilization is that of Jesus. We don't have to agree on anything, but that I am very adamant about. Up until Jesus, there was no pure martyrdom in that form. He is the innovator of that strategy, if you will. And since then, many other people replicated it. So Gandhi was one of them, and he, in his memoirs, explicitly says that he was inspired by Jesus's model of martyrdom. Martin Luther King, Nelson Mandela, as well as, of course, every Christian saint that the Catholics, for example, worship, and so on. And here's the thing: you are a latecomer to a conflict. You haven't been there for years or days or minutes even of what happened before this, and you witness something between two parties, okay, in which one of the parties suffers and dies. Okay, the question is of interpretation. If there is any violence on the part of the martyr, then you could conceivably interpret their death, their suffering, as punishment, as retribution, as fair play, as justice. And detractors will certainly do that. However, if a martyr is completely nonviolent and, you know, it's only one side that is inflicting suffering and pain and ultimately death on the person or a group of people, can be a group of people, then there is no other way to interpret it than to say that one side is evil, because this is what evil is hurting the innocent, and the other side is representing something that is quite good in human understanding, because innocence is kind of in the same semantic space as goodness. And that, for example, is probably why, Gandhi was so effective, and probably why peaceful protests are a lot more effective in turning public opinion than our violent protests, which is what's happening now with the protests in support of Palestinians. Public opinion is turning against them because of some well-publicized instances where there was mutual violence on, between campus security and the protesters. I'm not making a judgment on any of it. I'm just saying there's a psychology that goes into it that gives a huge benefit in interpreting the martyrs' cause as benevolent and their oppressors' cause as evil, when the martyr is abstaining from any kind of violence or aggression. That is probably why the war in Ukraine, which most people around the world knew very little of anything about the situation in Ukraine and Russia. But when the war started, there was this overwhelming support for Ukraine by people who didn't know the first thing about it. And probably the reason is the interpretation was easy. Ukraine did not prepare for the war, for better or for worse. Again, not making a judgment, but they were quite innocent. They were attacked by a much stronger opponent for no discernible reason, just for being.
So Ukrainian that takes a weapon and goes to war is not a martyr if he dies.
No,
okay.
Not a martyr. He's a maybe.
Hero. Okay. Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Then I think that's kind of consistent. I again, it's a little bit in opposite to what I would consider a martyr. Maybe it's because of my social background, or I don't know. It's just okay. But
yeah, it's a very Christian idea. But as a psychological strategy, again, we don't have to agree on Christian ideas, but
sure,
as a psychological strategy, it's extremely powerful. And if you're interested, by the way, I wrote a whole book about it.
Yeah, I started it.
The Moral Murder. Yeah. So I think it's my best work to date. So I highly recommend it.
Mm-hmm. What do you think about the? I think one big problem is that we glorify. Okay, then let's talk about heroes. That's okay. Also fine, because one problem I have is that we can never know if it's a hero. Is it a hero, or is it a suicide bomber, or is it a terrorist, or what it is? It's not that we can make objective calls on that, and maybe we should just stop celebrating heroes. Maybe
well,
that would be
I think we need heroes, right? I think there's a proverbial
violent
thing
heroes.
That one person's suicide bomber is another person's hero, right?
Yes.
So depending on your convictions and what side you are, of course, somebody fighting for you and your interest is going to be your hero, and somebody fighting against you and against your interests is not going to be your hero. Personally, there's a lot of gray area for me, and I don't know that it works for everybody. Probably no, it definitely doesn't work for everybody. But I think for me, violence is the line, right?
Mm-hmm.
This is an easy distinction to make, and I'm Ukrainian, so I grew up there. A lot of my really, really close friends are fighting in the front lines, and I worry about them and I send them good wishes every day. But I also know that even doing violence for something as intuitively simple as protecting your family, protecting your home, protecting your village, your town, right? It still changes a person. It changes a person in a way that's a little bit scary, which is why our returning veterans in the US have a much higher rate of radical actions, and why these militant right-wing groups are specifically recruiting them from the population of veterans, because once you have crossed that line, you are just different. You are a lot more okay with doing it, again, and for a different reason. It's just a line that, I don't know. It's a
So
very strong psychological barrier.
maybe we should. I mean, as hard as it is, the problem is you are probably now celebrating people that are defending Ukraine, and let's say that we know objectively from our perspective it is a good cause, and but then that also just, I mean, I'm always thinking about all the people that are using the Holocaust to resistance against Hitler to in order to justify what they're doing, right? So in many scenarios you're like, okay, don't do that, don't attack public buildings, don't, I don't know, like don't engage in terrorism, don't do this, don't do that, and you can always say, okay, but if under Hitler you would be okay with it, right? If we would have a fascist government and blah blah, and we have that right now, so I have to do it, right? So partly they're taking their justification from righteous resistance, and the reason for that is also that because that we are celebrating resistance against Hitler because we don't like Hitler, right?
I mean, I thought we didn't like Hitler, and now it turns out it has to be litigated all over again because a bunch of people really like Hitler, you know?
Wait, we don't like. Okay, me and you, we can agree we don't like Hitler,
Yes, I
and that's
don't like
why.
Hitler.
And that's why,
Yeah.
yeah, and I also don't like Hitler, but
Good.
that's why,
Okay.
that's why we are celebrating people that were in the resistance at the time against Hitler. But maybe that's not a good signal to send. Maybe it would be good to not celebrate that, to not have movies like, I don't know, like Inglorious Bastards or something like that, where basically violence against Hitler is being celebrated. Maybe at least we can say, okay, we like the cause, but the means were still not good.
Yeah, so in the book on martyrdom, I have a chapter, you know, Dostoevsky is like probably the best psychologist to read on any of this. Like he already
Mhm.
thought about it all and he had really good,
Which
really colorful
which book are you
cases.
thinking about?
So Crime and Punishment,
Uh-huh.
right?
Mm-hmm.
The main character,
Mm-hmm. Raskolnikov.
Raskolnikov, he is a very intellectual, very deep thinking,
Mm-hmm.
kind of trying to do, you know, right, to make the world better. He wants to make the world better. And the world is so bad. Everywhere he looks, you know, Russia is really good for really feeling it, right? Like it's unjust. The good people suffer, the bad people prosper. And he decides to take it upon himself, you know, like you said today, people want to fight against all things evil, right? Because Hitler is evil. So when you say it's just like Hitler, you're saying it's evil and I want to fight against. So he decides to fight against evil. And, you know, in his case, you know, evil lives right next door. This old lady who's a broker who's, you know, cheats her customers and makes them go broke and die of hunger and stuff like that. He decides to kill this woman and take the gold from her and give it to her like the Robin Hood, you know? And the whole book is a case study of what happens, what kinds of transitions psychologically he has to go through, but also the fact that Dostoevsky was genius enough to see, and you know, I as a psychologist who does research on this can confirm, is that you can't wield evil as a weapon without becoming its weapon yourself. So he goes to kill this woman, and on the way out, he encounters her mentally retarded sister, who's also abused by this woman. And he, you know, he ends up killing this poor, innocent, completely innocent woman as well. You know, so right away, he is being evil rather than fighting evil. And in the same novel, Dostoevsky also presents two other approaches to injustice in the world, which is just part of our, you know, existence. It's just, you know, the way life is. One is to completely ignore it, pretend it doesn't exist, live, you know, celebrate life for all the pleasures that it can provide. um, that's in the character of Svidrigailov, this rich um, pervert guy who sleeps with young girls
He's the guy
and
that wants to marry his sister, right? Is that him?
yes,
Yeah.
Raskolnikov's sister,
Yeah, yeah,
not his
Raskolnikov.
sister.
No, no,
Yes,
not his own sister. No.
yes,
Yeah,
yes,
yeah,
yes.
yeah.
So that's another way of dealing with the woes of the world, which are you know, always there and are still true. And the third model is that of Sonia Marmeladova, which is a young woman who was kind of forced to become a prostitute to save her starving younger children, um, who chooses,
Her
this
siblings.
horrible lifestyle.
Yeah.
Sorry,
Her siblings, right? She didn't
sorry,
have. I think she was doing it to save her
half
siblings.
sibling.
Yeah, her
Yes,
half
half.
siblings. Yeah, 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 yeah,
Yes,
yeah.
yes. So she's keenly aware. She's not oblivious to the horrors of both her situation in the world, being as unfair as it is. But she chooses to only pay a personal price. She chooses not to try to extract, either safety or pleasure or vengeance from anybody other than herself. So this is a model of martyrdom, right?
Mm-hmm.
This is a model of
Yeah.
self-sacrifice that is completely separate from any kind of violence or aggression. Um, and I think the wisdom of that, is really profound. That if you pick up arms, no matter what the cause is, you run the risk of becoming a weapon yourself, as are all people who participate in the military and the war. And like I said, like I pray for my friends and my dear cousin who are in the front, but I, more than anything, I wish for them to come home whole and to find peace, and to find de-radicalization, and to find distance from everything that they had to get into to become weapons. So I think fighting evil is a very fraught thing. Evil is tricky.
So you basically agree with me, right? That we should stop celebrating it. That we should stop celebrating violence for the good cause.
I don't know anything about shoulds. Thank God I don't need to advise on policy. I
Okay.
just I just see what I see, and I can report what I see, and I can write about it. And I just, for example, I can advocate for veterans, and I can advocate for care for people who return from zones of conflict. And even people in my field who look at a lot of these videos or materials, like even incel forums. I know a researcher who had to give up the whole thing of researching incels because the misogyny was too much. It just was too much to be with, right? So I think engagement with violence, even as a constant observer, um, is very dangerous. And for myself, I don't know anything about should for other people, but for myself, I try, for example, I never watch, my friends know this about me, I never watch shows or movies that have violence. I have to reduce the exposure to violence as much as I can because I get enough of it through my work.